Well, thank you, everyone. I'm glad to be here. So first of all, what is a gonad? A gonad is the reproductive organ in a fish. Simple as that. And I see everyone is over the age of 12, and I assume you've had the birds and bees talk, so maybe we can have some more fun with this talk. It is about fish sex. So I work for Conservation International, and we're a program that supports communities of place. So we work with different communities across the state to better understand their natural resources in terms of fish production and coral health. We also work with our leaders for tomorrow. So we work with students and youth across Hawaii. And we work with different markets and sectors to help for sustainable fisheries and marketing, and in policy and science. And so this is our team here. Some of them are in their room. We're a small and nimble team. I'm the science advisor there, so I get to work on a lot of different projects, which is great. And the one I'm going to tell you about today is our work that we do with a lot of the different fishers across the state to better understand fish biology. And so it's a fun talk. I'm a fish biologist by training. I got my PhD at the University of Hawaii, Manoa. I worked locally in Honolulu Bay. I've been out there doing a lot of different surveys, and I worked across the state with a lot of different fishing communities to help inform this work, and it's still going on today. And so the program that we started is called the Spawning Seasons Program. Sometimes we call it the Got Gonads Program, just to have fun with it. You might have seen some hats going around. They say Got Gonads, and they have a little manini on them. That's my program. And the program is really to provide shared learning and development of sustainable practices, sustainable fishing practices in Hawaii. So as a scientist, I learn a lot from working with fishers. They know the resource, and then we can bring tools to help them help us understand how to better manage that moving forward. And we also are able to gather more biological data. So as scientists, instead of coming in and fishing for a fish and not eating it and processing the samples, by working with fishers, then we get to work with fish that are already going to be consumed. We get to also get the scientific data from them to use for research. So it's a win-win for everyone for this program. And then we also get finer detail over spatial and temporal scales. So a lot of scientific research comes in and looks at one location at one time. When you work with fishers and communities across the state, you're able to get information over longer periods of time because you're working with people that are on the ground helping you do the work. And then you also get to look at more locations across the state. So you get a better idea of the current condition, but also how it's changing over time, because our fish populations are not remaining stable. They're going to fluctuate with changing climate conditions and changing fishing practices. So it really allows us to really hone in and see what's happening in Hawaii and respond to it. So that's the program in a nutshell. Today, I'm going to kind of talk to you about fish reproduction in general, just to introduce you to the subject and have some fun with it. And then I'll tell you how fish reproduction informs management, and then how we grow this knowledge base moving forward. And feel free to ask questions as we move on. This is going to be kind of a fun talk. So has anyone seen what I call substrate or demersal spawners? This is the mamo, or Audefta fijiensis, and the purple in the background there is its eggs, and this is a male defending its nest. Has anyone seen this snorkeling? Yeah, great. Do you know what time of the year it happens? No. Yeah, I think it happens all year, to be honest. But there are peaks in it. But so we're trying to figure out is when this happens for reef fish, what size it happens and why. But this is one form of spawning. So one way that fish reproduce is they lay eggs and they can guard them or not guard them. That's one way of reproduction. A lot of fish do this. I want to introduce you to another fish that you might not know, the pygmy dwarf goby. And my boss in the room actually helped me find this fish when I was doing my PhD. This fish is really blown up in this picture. It's less than 2 centimeters long. So if you haven't seen this fish, it's because it hides in this coral rubble that's seen in the background in this image, in rocks and crevices up in those little pukas or holes in the coral. And this fish is really interesting. It also is a demersal spawner, so it'll lay its eggs on the rocks and coral. But what's really cool about this fish is it has something called an oviposition, which means it has eggs and sperm at the same time. It is both male and female at the same time, which is really good for this fish if you're living in a little tiny rock crevice and you're waiting for a mate to come by. You don't have to wait for the opposite sex. You can switch sex and spawn and reproduce. So that's what's kind of cool about this fish. And if you look on the photo here, this fish is actually somewhat translucent, and this is a big, large egg mass. This is a female that's ready to lay her eggs right there. So this fish is also what we call cryptic benthic fauna. So you wouldn't notice this fish is cryptic and it's hiding. So it's not usually sampled. But when they do sample it, they'll sample it out in these pelagic tows for eggs and larvae that they'll do with NOAA and other agencies. And what they find is this fish is one of the most abundant reef fish in Hawaii. And yet now you are introduced to it, you may have never known it existed. So you can think that this fish is pretty important for food webs. A lot of different fish eat this fish. And now you can say one of the most abundant fish in Hawaii is the pygmy dwarf goby. It lived to be only about 60 days old and can start spawning at less than a centimeter and about 25 to 30 days old. So knowing its reproduction helps us understand food webs and ecology in Hawaii. The other type of reproduction you can have in fishes is what we call egg carriers or live bearers. So it can be like this tiger shark here. It actually gives birth to live young, but it has eggs that are released in its body cavity that mature before it develops and releases it, something that's called viviparity. You can also have skates and rays that will lay eggs. So have you ever seen the mermaid's purse? It's a little clear egg case. You can actually see the embryo developing inside of it. A lot of skates and rays will have that kind of reproduction. And so fish like this usually have very few young. They are usually more prone to overfishing and environmental pressures because it takes a lot longer to raise very few young. A lot of the fish we harvest in Hawaii are what we call pelagic spawners. And so this is the convict tang, or known locally as manini. And this is a fish that will release its eggs into the water column. So it's not laying them on the ground. It's not giving live birth. The eggs and the sperm mix together in big schools, and that's how the next generation is formed. And so I thought I would just kind of give you a video. Has anyone ever seen this kind of egg release spawning in Hawaii? So this is a video that I believe came from Johnston Atoll, so not locally here. I spent a lot of time in the water trying to film manini spawning. I'm just going to jump ahead. And if you watch really closely, you're going to see these manini moving around. And then in a few minutes, you're going to see them do an odd behavior. They're going to shoot to the surface all at once, and everyone's going to release their eggs all together. You'll see there's other fish schooling with these fish when they're spawning, and there's a couple of reasons for that, depending on the species. It's either to eat the eggs.
Did you film this?
I didn't. A friend of mine filmed this.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Okay, we should be getting close to the spawning.
You can kind of see.
You can see them in the background, but it's going to get really obvious.
Does Johnson have good call?
See, watch right there. So that is what it looks like when they spawn. That's an obvious behavior. All the eggs are released at once. They all communicate to each other and rush the surface like that. And
Do the blackfish eat their eggs?
so there's different fish here. Some of them, the blackfish, it looks like it's olivaceous. I believe they do eat their eggs, but sometimes you'll find other fish schooling around them because they want to spawn at the same time. The more eggs in the water column, that means the less chance you'll be eaten by another fish, right? You're just reducing your chances there. So a lot of fish that we harvest and eat will do this kind of pelagic spawning event. So that's a little bit about reproduction. So why do you think we need to know fish reproduction in Hawaii?
Sustainability.
Sustainability. Yep. So the Division of Aquatic Resources actually uses the size that fish reach adulthood and are capable of spawning as the minimum size limit for harvest. So here's some examples. A kala is 14 inches, opelokala is 16 inches, and manini is 5 inches. And so they look for reproductive information to set that minimum size limit. They also look for closed seasons. So a lot of fish have shortened seasons when they spawn. And during that time, they'll usually aggregate, and they're easily targeted by fishers. So those are times that different management agencies will look to stop fishing to let them reproduce and replenish the population. But really, we just need to know reproduction so that we can make sure that there are juveniles like this baby jack next year. We need to make sure that they are allowed to reproduce at least once, and that the seasons are protected for certain species so they're not all harvested out. So what do we need to know? A couple things. We need to know when they can reproduce, the size that they reach maturity. It's also called L50. It's the length where 50% of the population can reproduce. And that's what they use for management standards. And this seems like an easy task, but actually this information is not known for most of the reef fish that are managed by the Division of Aquatic Resources. That's because we harvest over 50 different reef fish. They're not very commercially valuable, and these studies can be expensive to do. But I use this manini as an example. I did my PhD on it, and I worked with fishing villages across the islands from Hawaii Island, Maui Nui, Oahu, and Kauai. And I got the length at 50, or the size when half the population is capable of spawning. And what I found is it's different in different bays and locations across the state. So that makes sense, right? There's different environmental conditions in different bays. There's different temperatures. There's different fishing pressure. All these things can affect growth in fish. So that complicates things a little bit. Have another example of why size is important. Yellow tang. Do you guys know this species? Yeah. So this is a popular fish in the aquarium industry. This fish has always been studied, and its biology is fairly well known, except for no one took a look from the aquarium fishery. So I worked with some aquarium fishers, looked at size at maturity, and I found that they were spawning as small as 6 centimeters. So I'm going to pass this around.
So the ones that I see at they're massive.
So that's a pretty small fish to spawn, and the age on these is usually less than 6 months. So these are juveniles in a sense, and they're not spawning a lot. They're spawning tens to maybe hundreds of eggs, whereas if they grew a few inches, they would be spawning thousands to hundreds of thousands of eggs. So it's a relatively small contribution to the next generation, but it is showing that they are spawning at that size. So that's useful information for the aquarium fishery and the state of Hawaii. So we also need to know how many eggs are produced. So I kind of alluded to that. Another example is manini. So we found that a 6-inch manini can produce 15,000 eggs, which is not that many. It's just starting out to spawn. So it has to kind of develop the behaviors and the eggs to do that. Really large manini, you rarely see an 8.5-inch manini, but they're out there. They'll spawn 150,000 eggs each time, and they'll spawn 2.5 times as often. They're used to it. They know where to go. They can replenish their eggs and their ovaries really fast, and they'll spawn again. So they can have 25 times as many eggs as a smaller fish. So why this information is valuable, it helps us understand what fish is an appropriate size to take. So this is a jack, but the same principle applies. So if you take a fish that's really small that hasn't reproduced yet, you're basically limiting its ability to reproduce and contribute to the next generation. So you don't want to take too small of a fish. If you take a really large fish, you're taking out the mega spawners, the ones that have all those eggs and spawn more often. So you want to leave those ones to help replenish the next generation. Those fish have also been shown to show other fish where those spawning aggregations are and how to behave. So they're also important to leave in the population. And so you aim for the medium fish, the one that has reproduced several times, but isn't this mega spawner. And we hope that some of the fish will make it through to be mega spawners into the future.
So you want the 2 to 3 pound, not the 6 to 7.
For this species, yes. Yeah. And know your area. If you know that there's a lot of small fish and not a lot of large fish, then maybe it's time to give that area a rest. If you know there's a lot of large individuals and there's a lot of small and the population's doing really well, it probably doesn't matter so much if you took a large individual because there's many more in that population. So there's another thing we need to know. We need to know when and where the fish spawn. So there's different cues that will get fish to spawn. Does anyone know what might make a fish react and want to release its eggs and spawn? Does anyone know of a cue? Temperature? I heard temperature. So there's seasonal variations in temperature. Yep, some fish will spawn. In Hawaii, we have a big spawn in spring. So right now is a really good time. A lot of fish are reproducing from now through June. It's a good one. It's another. Thanks. Yeah, the moon. So, and Hawaiians really knew this. They had a lunar calendar, and they had 3 Honolulu, Ho'onui, Poipoi, and Emi were the 3 different lunar phases the moon were broken down into, and every month has a name. And so they used these moons to figure out timing of spawning and reef fish because they understood it was linked to that. They also used it for planting and harvesting and many other things. So yes, moon is another one that a lot of fish will cue in to spawn. But that's also because it's related to tide. If you think about moons and tides, on big moons, so the full moons, will have a really big tide, and also on the new moons, the muku moons will have a really big tide. And so those big tides translate into big currents, and fish respond a lot to currents. A lot of fish will release their eggs when there's really heavy currents. There's a lot of different theories onto why they think that happens. Some of it is to move those eggs off the reef and away from open mouths that want to eat them. That's one idea. And now, not every fish is the same. They're going to have different strategies, but that's just one example. So for the research that I did in Honolulu Bay, just right around the corner, I found that manini or convict tang really responded to both the new and full moon. So let's see, if you look on this graph here, here's new moon. This is basically the weight of the gonad, so how heavy or how mature the eggs are. And you'll see that it has really big spikes for new, full moon, back down again, and then back up at new moon. And it'll do this all the way through the spring season. So from now through June, it'll be out spawning on every new and full moon. And they can form pretty large schools. I've seen schools of 800 individuals grouped to spawn. So this is a pretty big event. And they're not just coming from that area, they're coming from the surrounding radius. We haven't tagged and tracked them, so I don't know how far, but I spent a lot of time in the bay, and I think it's on the scale of a couple kilometers. So they could actually be going in and out of Hanauma Bay to go out inside and spawn. So that brings us to the next point, is knowing your spawning aggregations, where they are. That's another big thing that you want to know. You want to set up protected areas in places where fish spawn so that you protect those spawning aggregations, and fish don't have to go outside the protected areas to spawn where they could be caught by fishers and then come back in. So that's another one that you want to know. And then there's one more that I want to tell you about, which is behavior and sex change. So not all fish stay the same sex. Some change throughout their life. I told you about that goby that changes. The other one that we harvest a lot of is uhu species. So if you ever heard of people saying, don't take the blue uhu, that's because that's the male. And so uhu start out life as females. Every single uhu starts out as a female. And as they get bigger, they switch to being the dominant fish, and they'll change to be the male. And they have harems of females that stick with the blue males. And if the blue is removed, the next largest female will transition, become the male, and spawn. So if you remove the blue uhu, you're basically ending that spawning for that harem or group of uhu until the next fish transitions. Yeah, that's sad that you haven't seen a male uhu.
I've seen a parrotfish that looks like that color.
That's parrotfish, same fish. Parrotfish and uhu, same fish. Yeah.
Somebody gave it to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I've eaten uhu too.
But this was 50 years ago.
Yep. Yep. So, I mean, there's a lot more research on who that could be done. There are certain things as sneaker males. So they're finding out that sometimes there's maybe one extra male that looks pretty small, like a female, and it actually has a testy and will spawn a little bit of sperm with the other fish when they reproduce. So there might be other ways to help boost the population, but there still is a lag time and a serious response if you go out and fish the blue ones. So those are other things to think about in terms of what's important for reproduction and management and how you harvest and how your harvest practices affect fish populations. So how do we get reproductive information? So there's a lot of fish like a hole out there. Myself as a scientist can go out and harvest them, or I can work with fishers, which is a lot easier. And I talk to fishers and tell them what a gonad is. They're out dissecting their fish every day. They usually rip it all out in one clean shot and throw it away. And so we work with fishers to point out where the gonad is in fish. And fish all have paired gonads, which means they have two, one on each side of the body cavity. We also tell fishermen to measure the fish length in a consistent manner and try to keep track of it so they can look at the size of the gonad with the size of the fish, figure out size it's reproducing and when it's reproducing. And so we can look at relative gonad sizes, and I work with a lot of fishers to do this. And so these are actually photos that came from our Facebook site called Spawning Seasons. And so fishers go on there and post photos of their fish with a ruler next to it so you can get the size compared to the gonad size. And you can tell that the photo on the left is a female that is not in the spawning season. I can tell that because I'm used to looking at it. But if not, you can post it and ask questions and we'll tell you what it is. And the photo on the right is a female that's in the spawning season. So you can tell the gonads are much larger. The fish is ready to reproduce. And that information can be shared with the network of fishers that we have around Hawaii. The other thing we can look at is a gonad index. So this is the relative weight of the gonad to the fish body weight. So that upper photo, it's a little gruesome, but that's the fish eggs removed from the fish. And you basically just take that relative weight and measure that over time. And that's very accurate. And if you want to get really geeky, like I like to get geeky, I do histology. And so histology is taking a piece of the gonad tissue, embedding it into wax or plastic, and then section it really small with a knife. So it's really thin. You get a cross section of the entire gonad, and then we stain it with different dyes. And then we're able to look at each individual egg, the structure of the cell, how the different gonad is progressing. And so we can get really good information. So sometimes you'll get a gonad back that's really small and you don't know if the fish is immature or just spawned. And we can look at the thickness of the gonad wall. We can look at, see if there's what we call post-ovulatory follicles, which are remnants of eggs, kind of like an eggshell left inside the gonads. So we can see if it is a mature female that's spent or if it's immature. So we can get a little bit more information than just working with fishers. And it makes for some really pretty pictures, which I should have posted all over the inside of my house because I just think they're gorgeous. And so the other part of this is really sharing that information, right? So we're working with a group of fishers, we're getting a lot of information, but really it all comes down to the fisher. DAR can set whatever rules and regulations they want, but if the fishers don't understand them or don't comply with them, then it doesn't really matter. So we get this information out by working with fishers and then producing moon calendars. So we worked with a lot of different communities to produce seasonal calendars. And I have a couple of examples here. They're a bit old, but now some of the communities are actually doing it themselves and producing their own. So we don't have to go in and do it for them. We give them the technology, they can do it themselves. And again, I said the other way to do it is through our social network. So we have online tools. We have a Facebook page where you can post a photo anytime you catch a fish, or if you just want to check us out, it's Spawning Seasons on Facebook. And so I've been doing this program since 2011. Since then, we've harvested over 4,000 fish samples. That's not 4,000 fish that I use for science. That's working with fishers to get scientific samples from those fish. And we've got information of over 50 different species. We've published 8 different scientific publications for different fish species. And we have this growing database which now means that we can continue to collect information. And as we get the samples we need one by one, we can get the life history for every fish that we consume and harvest in Hawaii, and maybe some that we don't as well. So what can you do? You can share spawning information or check us out on Spawning Seasons on Facebook. You can opt to catch and eat medium-sized fish, and you can not target or interrupt spawning aggregations. They're really sensitive during that time, so if it looks like a spawning aggregation, it probably is one. You cannot fish it.
How do you know what a spawning aggregation is?
How do you know? Usually you'll see changed behaviors, and you'll see that they're indifferent to you. So if they don't move away and you come to them, they're so busy in what they're doing that they're easy to shoot, easy to approach. Yeah. And they have a lot of different colorations, patterns. They'll sometimes rub their bellies on the bottom of the ocean floor or on each other in a very interesting manner. Yeah. So I want to give you a couple examples with the next 5-10 minutes. So Conda is a species that we did this year. So this fish is an introduced Marquesan mullet. We call it locally Conda. This fish in the photo is about the size of my shaka. So it's 14 centimeters, 15 centimeters or so around 6 inches. It was introduced in the 50s accidentally. It was a bait fish, so it came in with bait fish. It's really, really small, and it spread across the entire Hawaiian Islands. And it is in the same habitat as our native mullet, so you'll find them with the sharp-nosed mullet or the striped mullet, so ama or wowo. So it likes estuaries and freshwater areas. They're all out in Honolulu Bay. They kind of look like juvenile ama or striped mullet, but they have very different biology, which makes them very invasive and able to consume a lot of the resources that the striped mullet or native mullet would be using. So we found that they reproduce really fast at a really small size. So age of maturity is a little over half a year and at 14 centimeters. The max size of these fish is not that big, and they live to be about 1.5 years old. So they're really just out there spawning year round and replenishing themselves and competing with our native mullet. So if you ever see Conda on the menu, eat them. Yeah, but it's really hard to identify them from the native mullet. So look, on the native mullet has a dark black circle spot on the pectoral fin. These ones don't. So it's either going to be wowo then, which is the stripe, or the sharp-nosed mullet, or Conda that you're eating.
Well, it sure has a big gonads.
It sure has big gonads. Yeah, you said it. Yep, it's meant to spawn. This fish, it does this every time. We found it spawning every single month out of the year. We looked in Hilo and in Honolulu Bay. They had year-long spawning cycles every month ready to go. Yep. Which makes sense. If they were introduced and took over, they usually will have very reproductive, fast growth kind of biology. The other one that we're looking at is a hole or the Hawaiian Flagtail. And so this is one that is actually prized by fishers. It tastes really good fried up. Its size at maturity is around 17.5 centimeters or around 7 inches. And we found a spawning season in this fish, so it looks like it slows down during the summer, but it has a pretty prolonged spawning. The minimum size limit is 5 inches on these, so we found that they reach maturity slightly larger. So if you wanted to aim for a slightly larger size, you could, but then you get into those mega spawner size. There's not that much differential. But what's good about this fish is it seems to spawn every month. Seems to be pretty sustainable fish as it is right now. And it's a good eating fish, so it's a good option. And with that, I was hoping you guys would just ask more questions and talk story. So we have time. Yes.
How sure are the scientists about the statement all fish have 2 gonads?
Ooh, tricky
I
question.
thought you said that all fish have gonads.
I have not come across a fish with one. They usually have paired gonads. I'm trying to think of my evolutionary biology training if there was ever a fish that didn't. I do not think so, but fish have a variety of sexual patterns and types. I will look and double check, but I believe every fish has two.
The other question is, let's assume they all have gonads too. How does a fish just generally change from one sex to the other sex?
Yeah, how does it change over?
Yeah.
Well, depends on the fish. So with uhu or with grouper, usually you have one of the gonad states. So if it starts out as female, usually all the different oocytes or eggs inside the female will break down, be reabsorbed into the gonad, and then it'll start forming sperm ducts and spermatids, which will then replicate, and sperm tissue will be produced. So it'll usually remove an entire reproduction part and incorporate another. But like the goby I showed you, that goby has both spermatids or sperm producing cells, and it has oogonia, or the beginning precursor of ovary and oocyte cells at the same time. And so they're ready to go at either time. So it really depends on the fish you're talking about to answer that question. Some fish have compartments where they have sperm and ovaries at all times. Some don't. Yeah.
There, I don't know how to explain it, but the Conda say, short life.
Yep.
And so it must breed the Conda to be, right, I don't know what term to use. I mean, in a human female, it's 15 to 45.
Yeah.
And so how do you input your optimum breeding area? Now, certain fish are going to live like 75 years. Like,
yeah.
They think like uhu,
Yep.
they live a long time.
Yep. So uhu can live to be about 15 to 18, I think is the max age for uhu. But sturgeon fish, so like kole, for instance, can live to be 40 years old. Yeah. So different fish have different reproductive strategies. So I guess I'll start with Conda first. So Conda, our max age was 1.2 years, not because they can't live longer, but because I think they're getting eaten up first. Everything wants to eat Conda, they're the perfect size. So I bet you if they weren't preyed upon, they live a lot longer. But because they're preyed upon, their strategy is as soon as I'm reproductively capable, spawn. Spawn every month because I might be eaten tomorrow. Where kole and other fish species have maybe developed more defenses or have a different way, like kole hide in the coral heads, things like that, can escape predators. And so they have a different spawning style. So they live a lot longer. They wait to, well, I was going to say they wait to get a little bit larger before reproducing, but that's not true. We just found that kole reproduce at a really small size too, just like the yellow tang. But some of it is pairing growth versus reproduction. How much do you want to invest in getting large so you can have more babies? Because remember, if you get really large, you can have more eggs. So that's pretty good strategy. But if you don't have time to get large, you're going to get eaten or something else is going to happen, you're going to want to start spawning sooner and more often. So the reproductive strategy is going to vary by species and also by fishing pressure and other pressures applied on them. So one of the questions to me with yellow tang is, are they spawning at that size naturally, or is the fishing pressure making them spawn younger and smaller? Yes.
How did you get interested in this?
That's a good question.
In fish reproduction, I don't know. I was always interested in fish. Always loved fish. I started out into my master's in salmon biology, and so I was studying reproduction in hatchery salmon, and so I kind of got into the reproduction side of that. But I think it's really great. It's really amazing, and that's how we live, right? Is by reproducing. So.
Are you from here?
I'm from Washington State originally. Yeah.
So how long have you been here?
I've been on the island 9 years. I've been back, but I did my undergrad before at Hawaii Pacific University.
Wonderful.
Thank you. So here's my contact information. I'll keep on answering reproductive questions all night. You can keep on trying to stump me, but make sure if you want to contact me, there's up there too. Yeah.
You might have answered it and I just didn't hear, but when all the mini like swam up and then like released their eggs, how were they fertilized? Did the male just release two? And
Yep. And the soup, and when they're released into the ocean, they mix, and the sperm meets the egg.
when they lay them on like the eggs, like the first picture,
Mm-hmm.
it just swims over them too. And
Yep. So, the demersal spawners will usually, the female will go through and lay her eggs, and then the male will go over and fertilize the eggs. And it's a lot more close contact. They usually have sperm that aren't as energetic, and they don't have a long of life, really. And so there's different sexual strategies in there as well. But there's a really cool fish. This is my favorite fish. It's a scorpion fish. Might be kind of weird. It's a scorpion fish. And so scorpion fishes have a gelatinous matrix that they keep their eggs in because they stick into the substrate and they don't want them to come off. And so what happens in this fish is she'll run into a male, and she might not run into a male all that often, and it might not be the spawning season, but she will store the male's sperm in her body cavity until her eggs are ready and the environment's ready. And then she will release both the egg and the sperm and fertilize externally. So she'll carry around that male sperm with her. So fish have a variety of different reproductive modes.
Is there a Hawaiian name for scorpion fish?
Go, right. No, is probably the most common. No. Which scorpion fish?
Nohu? Yeah, Nohu's a scorpion.
What's the general? What species?
right here, this one.
Double or,
Are you talking about the Titan?
yeah, within our species.
So the species I was talking about isn't a Hawaiian species.
Oh, it's not.
It is a scorpion fish, though, in the scorpion family.
That one is no.
Yeah.
Now that you mentioned substrate, what's the other word on you had substrate, spawners, and
Demersal. Demersal just means the bottom, the floor, ocean floor. Mm-hmm.